My name is Srilata Raman, and I'm professor of Hinduism at the Department for the Study of Religion at U of T. In 2022, I was incredibly fortunate to receive a wonderful JHI, research fellowship, the 6 months one, to do work on my project, which is going to be part of hopefully a third monograph in the next years. And so this gave me a chance to explore some texts, some persons, which who were incredibly important at the grassroots level, if you like, in the region of South India nowadays called Tamil Nadu. It's the area where people speak predominantly the language of Tamil. The impact that these figures had on religion at the local level, an impact which has actually not only not been explored, but has been forgotten, if you like, in terms of the contemporary moment. What is the project about? It's going to, the title of the project, the title I gave it is Dalit Vedanta, which is, some people might consider it a problematic title. Why would they do that? Because, first of all, the word Dalit, in a way, is an anachronism. People in 19th century South India, early 20th century, who belonged to the very, very lowest tier of the caste system, were not calling themselves Dalit. In the Tamil country, they were calling themselves Panchamas, the fifth category or something like that. But Dalit is the word we now use to speak, is the word they have decided to call themselves as a way of talking about the cruelty of a religious system that subjugated them for centuries. Dalit, a word meaning oppressed. So I chose that word for the project as a way of acknowledging that is what they have been. And even if it's an anachronism, it underlies, the force, the driving motivation that I have in going back and looking at these figures who came from that category and the works they composed. So that is the Dalit part of the project. Vedanta, so putting Dalit and Vedanta together, for those who study the religious textual traditions of India, might even sound also like kind of a strange anomaly. Why? Because Vedanta is a system of a theological or philosophical system that has long been the prerogative of the elite in South India. Not just in South India, which is my focus, but well, on a pan-Indian scale. It is a system of thought that gained huge influence over the centuries, eclipsing other ways of thinking about the relationship between the highest power, God, and the world, and how the world is constituted, and the relationship which pertains between God and the individual human being, and finally how one can attain liberation, release, or salvation through understanding the nature of the relationship as a human being, right? And huge efflorescence of literature in Sanskrit, but also in the Indian vernaculars over centuries. But very much a literature that has remained predominantly in the hands of elite males over centuries, So there is even a sense that, you know, this was not a knowledge that was accessible to those who were non-elite, let alone the very lowest of the low in terms of the caste system, meaning the Dalits. And certainly there is enough textual evidence for us to assume that is the case. But what my project is trying to do is to somewhat, to not shatter that view, but to certainly bring in materials that are going to ask questions that will disturb that view, that will certainly inject other perspectives, other materials that will enable us, perhaps, to rewrite the historiography of religion in South India, in South Asia most broadly, in South India, with a focus on the materials from the Tamil region. So how will it do that is one side of it. It will do that because it will retrieve from relative obscurity certain very, very modest religious figures who, a lot of them, or the kind of evidence we have, shows that a lot of them emerged in the 19th century as a result of the conditions of colonial modernity, which enabled possibilities for social mobilization and social assertion, and therefore religious assertion among the lower castes. That was not possible in quite the same way before, and was the result, of course, of colonialism and some of the structures, the new structures it created. So you do have figures like this prior to the 19th century. You have them start in the 16th, 15th century onwards in the Tamil region. But the evidence is very sparse. And also we don't have in any way, in any form, their life stories. That changes for the 19th century material. So what we're having are these figures who can be called subaltern, and some of them Dalit, many of them Dalit, but at the, subaltern figures who emerge at the local level. They establish very modest little religious establishments, if at all. Usually what happens is they would be recognized as a holy person. The local villagers might, offer them a dwelling, create a little abode for them, start to pay their respects to them. They would then cease to wander, become sedentary. They would live in that place. They would give talks. They would perform, quote unquote, certain kind of miracles that would reinforce their holiness. And that may even be all. Or they might write a book, maybe 2 books. Well, 2 works, compose 1 or 2 works, and that would be it. And apart from having a presence in local memory, having some kind of a local shrine where they would have been buried, a kind of shrine, there would be no further evidence of them, because they would not, even if they had disciples, they may not have lasted very long, and within 50 years faded from memory. Or if not, they might have some modest, disciple lineage which maintains some memory of them, right? So these are the kind of figures that are the subject of this project. And but here is the astonishing thing. Two things become very interesting, in the 19th century onwards, which have enabled me to embark on this project. One is the emergence of, even if they didn't write anything, the emergence of hagiographies, you know, life stories of these saintly figures, written by some devoted admirer, which then, because of the proliferation of print culture in the 19th century, actually comes to be printed, and one or two musty copies lie around in some archives, often also in the extraordinary archive in the British Library, for instance. So you actually have accounts of a life, however laudatory, however hagiographic, some sense of this person. And these are the materials which I've been collecting. But then, as I said, they also sometimes wrote, and quite a few of them wrote works. And we would think that these might have been sort of very simple religious sort of works, speaking for a kind of religion that was beyond caste always, often very monistic, in the sense that, along the lines of identifying the divine in everyone and relating, and that divine is the same, there is no distinction in it, kind of writing. And you would think it could be, incredibly sort of simple stuff. But here is the astonishing thing. It is not. It can be also. Well, first of all, it can be in what we call seiyul, which is poetry, not prose. Maybe simple meters, but very concise, often even obscure language, and requires a real knowledge of pre-modern literature and grammar to understand it. So, it would be in that kind of language. And it would also, and very often is, related to an extremely sophisticated tradition of the worship of the god Shiva, a tradition which took root in the Tamil country as early as the 7th century, brought, in Sanskrit originally, but then starts flourishing after that. A huge corpus of elite literature, a tradition called the Shaivism, but which was sort of in its origins completely dualistic. In other words, there is God and there is man, and man can never become God even after being liberated and getting the highest wisdom, but which increasingly also becomes, at least if not very strictly doctrinally in terms of the literary output, more and more monistic, accepting, that man can in some sense become so godlike that the distinction between man, sorry, I keep saying man, but these books are all written by males and the character who gets released is male, but of course persons can become so godlike that the distinction between them and God is practically irrelevant for all affective, purposes. So there was this very long tradition of very elite literature. The astonishing thing is, these very modest subaltern figures plug into that literature, and there is a reason why they're able to access it in certain ways, which I can't go into because it's very complex, um, and write these works. So they are, and precisely because they write these works, they are partaking in that elite discourse of what I call Vedanta, right? So the project, the 6 months gave me, I'd started collecting material. It gave me time to kind of map the contours of the project to the extent that, uh, who are the figures I'm looking at, what have they produced, um, also what kind of a very modest ethnography can I undertake to go to these places, visit maybe their shrines, get in local information to be able to bring this all together. So it's been one of these marvelous opportunities offered to me by the JHI. I have produced an article. There is much more in the pipeline, which will bring together these materials in the monograph, which I'm thinking about. And what I think I hope to do through that, as I've already said in the beginning, is to somehow unsettle a very entrenched binary in the study of Indian religion between, what can be called the great tradition and little tradition. This was a kind of ethnographic, anthropological sort of distinction, or between the classical and the folk, the elite and the non-elite. I'm trying to show that the picture is much more complicated, not always, but sometimes, and that there was the possibility for the religious assertion of those who we might think had been always silenced. As in the colonial landscape, they were able um, to come up. Yes, so here we are, and hopefully I will be able to have the monograph out in the not too distant future, as a result of this wonderful impetus given to it by the JHI Fellowship.